Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, May the 9th, 2025. So one of the big issues in astrology relates to people being born on the same day. And of course, if astrology were to really work, then you might say that people born on the same day should have very similar personalities and indeed very similar destinies. And the reality is this doesn't always work, and this is a criticism that people often make of astrologers. Now, as astrologers, one can come back and say, well, you've got to consider other things. You've got to consider the environment, what kind of background people were brought up in, and maybe different backgrounds, different environments are going to trigger particular astrological configurations. So, if you have, for example, Jupiter opposition Uranus in your horoscope, and you're brought up in one background, that Jupiter-Uranus opposition is going to manifest in one way. If you're brought up in a different background, it's going to work in another way, and that might have an impact, for example, on how long you live, and of course what kind of experiences you have. And today, May the 9th, it is the anniversary of a few birthdays, and one person who was born on May the 9th, 1921, was a man called Daniel Berrigan. Now, I hadn't actually heard of Daniel Berrigan before yesterday, but I looked him up, and apparently he's a really important figure in the United States, in the United States protest movement. And Daniel Berrigan was a Catholic priest, and he was a Jesuit, and he was really interested in peace. He regarded peace as being just incredibly important. And, he became a Catholic priest. He'd been a Catholic all his life. He came from a family who I think had a tradition of trade union involvement. And he came across what was going on in Vietnam, and he got very much involved in the protests against the Vietnam War. And in one instance, he was involved with the burning of draft files using homemade napalm, and I think for that he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. And he was involved in the Ploughshares movement. He was attacking going into American bases and attacking the missiles. And then later in life, with the AIDS epidemic, he got involved in AIDS activism. And he was getting arrested, very late in life. But he died at the age of 94. So I don't think you can say that he's a martyr. I mean, he didn't die for what he believed in, but he certainly went to prison, and he wasn't going to stop, and he regarded it as an absolute matter of principle. On the other hand, someone else who was born on May the 9th, 1921, who had Sagittarius rising, so Daniel Berrigan had Scorpio rising, but someone who was born on that day but who had Sagittarius rising was Sophie Scholl, who was born in Germany. And, like Daniel Berrigan, she was really into peace. She was born in the middle of reached adulthood during the Second World War, I think, or just before the Second World War. And she thought the war had to stop, and she was like Daniel Berrigan, into protest, into putting up posters around Munich, criticizing the Nazi regime. But it being the Nazi regime, she wasn't just sent to prison; she was guillotined. So I'm sure that Daniel Berrigan, from what we know of him, would have been prepared to, risk his life for what he believed in. But he was born in the United States. He was, for all the criticism you can make of the United States, protesters were not executed in the 1960s in the US, but in Germany in the 1940s, it was a different picture. But yeah, they were born on the same day, and there seems to be a certain common impulse, common sort of, I won't say common destiny. I mean, Daniel Berrigan died at the age of 94. Sophie Scholl was guillotined in her early 20s. So yeah, there is a difference, but that is because two people were born in different places. And another person who was born on May the 9th, 1921, was the artist Manuel Gregorio Acosta. Now, I've got his picture sort of slightly obscured in the thumbnail. That is not actually his picture. That is a picture he made of Cesar Chavez, who was a union leader in the 1960s. And so he did come from a revolutionary family. His family had supported, I think, Pancho Villa, but I don't think he himself was a revolutionary, though he was very aware of the protest movement in the 1960s, and he, the union. The union activity, and that's why he got to paint a picture of Cesar Chavez. He did have an early death, and he was bludgeoned to death by a drunk in, I think, 1989, but I don't think that was really an example of martyrdom. But I just wanted to consider May the 9th, 1921, just as a day. And, what is it about that day, January the 9th, 1921, which might encourage people to be involved in protest? Indeed, to be involved in protest so much that they're prepared to take the risk of going to prison or even being executed. By the way, today is also the anniversary of the Treaty of Windsor, which is apparently the oldest treaty still in existence, and that was a peace treaty between Britain and Portugal in the 14th century. And yeah, it's still going. Britain and Portugal have not been at war since then. Well, of course, it was England and Portugal in the 14th century. So that gives you an idea about what I want to talk about in this video, or at least at the end of the video. But before I do that, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, May the 9th, 2025. So here is the astrological picture for today, and you can see that the moon is still in Libra. Moon is at 16 Libra. So that means that the moon is edging into the Via Combusta. So this is the picture for New York at noon today, May the 9th. So moon going into the Via Combusta. So that will be happening New York time, sort of late morning. Not even late morning, sort of, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's maybe 9:30 in the morning, 10 o'clock, something like that. If you're in California, then the moon will go into the Via Combusta, really early in the morning. And yeah, if you're in Europe, then it will happen a bit later. So today, yes, the moon is in Libra like it was yesterday, but now the moon is moving into the Via Combusta. Remember, the Via Combusta is that part of the sky between 15 degrees Libra and 15 degrees Scorpio. And of course, when the moon moves into the Via Combusta, things can happen. We might not expect them to happen. It just happens out of the blue when we make plans and we have to start again because things are more complicated than we realize. And yeah, things can just blow up. And that should perhaps be of some concern to us. I was, looking at the news when I did, as I started doing this video. I'm making this video on Thursday morning. It's right now it's 7:24 a.m. Pacific time on Thursday, but of course it is for Friday. And yeah, things in between going on between India and Pakistan, it's really hotting up there. This is not fun. It's a bit worrying. I mean, I don't think it will go completely out of control, but it is of concern. And with the moon in the Vir combustor, I mean, we have to be careful of about the law of unintended consequences. We might not realise what the implications of our actions really are. Now, the moon in Libra essentially makes a single aspect. It makes a sextile to Mars. There aren't any other major aspects involving traditional planets going on at the moment. So, although I think it could be a very tense day because of other things, because of a general background, I think that there's nothing specific today. It's kind of light on exact aspects. And so, that means that I don't necessarily have so much to say, so much to talk about. So, that's a picture for New York at noon. If we look at the view from Sydney, Australia, the moon is earlier in the sign. It's at 9 degrees Libra at noon in Sydney, Australia. So that moon sextile Mars is actually starting to separate. If you're in the Americas, it's not very strong. It's losing its power. But if you're in Sydney, Australia, or New Zealand, or East Asia, then that moon sextile Mars is exact in the middle of the day. So you might really feel it. And I regard that moon sextile Mars as being pretty fortunate. It allows you to get things done and make an impact. It's a sextile. Moon square Mars or moon conjunct Mars can be quite angry, but moon sextile Mars is more constructive. We can make an impression without necessarily causing too much fuss. And then there is the heliocentric view. So this is the positions of the planets, putting the sun at the center of the solar system, and we have a wide Venus-Mars square. This Venus-Mars square has been building up for some time. It's now starting to separate, so Venus is actually 2.5 degrees off that square of Mars. So that Venus square Mars is probably a fairly mild influence, and it is about how we get on with people and who we like, who we dislike, and like it or not, we can't get on with everyone, and that might be the message there. And other things, Jupiter is now beginning to make a square to Neptune heliocentrically. Remember, heliocentrically we don't get any retrograde motion, but Jupiter is just starting to form that square. It's now within 0.5 degree, so I think that we can say that there is a Jupiter-Neptune feel to where we are at the moment. It could actually be a very subtle influence. I regard Jupiter-Neptune squares as potentially being about fantasy, about having high hopes that things can work out. There is a religious dimension to Jupiter square Neptune, but it can be the kind of fantasy which is like most fantasies can't be realized in the real world. I mean, that is the definition of a fantasy, and so maybe in this world in which we live there is a fair amount of over optimism, but I don't think so. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. We shouldn't forget that, geocentrically, Jupiter is about to move into Gemini. Sorry, Jupiter is about to move into Cancer next month, and Jupiter is about to move into its exaltation. And I think that's a good reason to be optimistic. But we'll talk about that, in a few weeks' time. So that's a heliocentric picture. But the message is that in terms of exact aspects today, really, it's light. Okay, Mercury, over the weekend, Mercury moves into Taurus, so we've got something to talk about there. But Mercury hasn't gone into Taurus yet; it's just waiting to go into Taurus. So, maybe there's not a great deal to say. So anyway, let's start by looking at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, May the 9th, 2025. Aries. Aries, the moon is making a sextile to Mars. And, this sextile to Mars is quite uplifting. It makes you aware of what you can do. And, there are lots of things you can do today, Aries. There's nothing much to limit you. But there is a lack of drama here. Moon sextile Mars, the sextile is a relatively weak aspect, and if you're in the Americas, it's especially weak. The moon sextile Mars has already passed its strength, past its point of maximum strength. So if you want to get anything done, it may take a little bit of effort and a little bit of planning. It's not going to just happen naturally. And this sextile between Moon and Mars says something about other people and relationships, and you can certainly get noticed. But again, you have to make the effort. Even if you are in Sydney, Australia, or in New Zealand, that Moon sextile Mars, where Moon is sextile Mars, is pretty exact around lunchtime, middle of the day. Even then, it's a sextile. You still have to put in some effort. You can't assume everything's going to work out without trying. And more so in the Americas. But if you do really want something to happen, and you're reasonable about it, you can not just make it happen, but you can enjoy yourself in the process. And at the same time, Aries, I think that you have a natural ability at the moment to get on with other people. You don't have to do much. You can just be yourself, and really that's enough. And there probably isn't much more to say. In fact, I don't think there's anything more to say. So I think overall, Aries, effort is going to be required if you want to make the most of today. But if you are able to put in that effort, I think that things should work out pretty well for you. Taurus. Taurus, you might feel that something is just being denied to you. You feel you deserve it, you should get it, but it's not there. It's just not happening. And the reason might be people's attitudes, and you perhaps would like some support or some encouragement, and it just might not be forthcoming. And that could be quite annoying and disappointing. But the question is, what is it about, and what actually is the problem? The problem might be, Taurus, that you're not taking things seriously enough. That if you assume that everything is just going to be light and easy and relatively painless and effortless, then you're going to be disappointed. On the other hand, if you regard everything as being hard work and you're prepared to make the effort, then things might be easier. And additionally, other people are going to quite possibly be more serious than usual, and they're not just going to respond to you in a sort of a light and easy way, and you have to accept that situation. You have to show some seriousness yourself, And if you can do that, then I think you can start making progress. And right now, today we've got Moon sextile Mars, and with that Moon sextile Mars, it's not an especially exciting aspect for a Taurean, but it does reward you for any effort you make. And in particular, we're talking about the kind of effort that is just about making sure that everything is done properly. There are no shortcuts today, and perhaps that's the problem. So if you've got a lazy streak and that lazy streak starts to manifest, it could be an especially disappointing day. Or if you assume that someone or something else is going to sort everything out, that could be a problem. On the other hand, if you just grind away, you put in the work, you make the effort to understand other people and understand what they take seriously, then in the end, I think that you will make progress. And additionally, you'll get out what you put in, just about. I mean, okay, you may get out half of what you put in, so you may have to put in more work than expected. But if you put in enough work, put in enough effort, you'll find that you eventually are able to reach your destination. Gemini, I don't think that today is necessarily going to be very exciting, but on the other hand, I don't think that there's going to be a great deal of pressure. I think that you can, by and large, do what you want to do, and if you find something interesting and exciting, then you can go for it, or at least try to make the most of it. I mean, that's the point. I think that you're going to have this feeling that things should be exciting. You can see how things could be, how things could really be interesting, but just in practice, there might be a feeling that it just doesn't work out quite as you'd expected. So, is today completely unexciting? I mean, I think it could be, but you can still see the potential, and you can still see things moving. You're aware that something is changing, even if it's not actually manifesting, right in front of you. And so, what you can do is, work away at what matters to you, what is important to you, not out of obligation. It's not that kind of day. You do things because you enjoy them. And if you can take that approach, then Gemini, I think that, slowly but surely you will get results. And, don't forget your ability to communicate. I think at the moment you're able to communicate, very powerfully, and it may not be that you can actually create action through what you say, but I think you can be listened to, and you're going to be able to transmit your impressions of the world. And so if you if you're reaching some conclusions about the world and where it's all moving, then people will listen to you, and they might share some of your excitement. But as far as actual movement is concerned, maybe not. It's not quite that kind of day, but it's possible that you can prepare the ground. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, it needn't be a bad day, but I don't think it's going to be a spectacular day. I think that if you can find people who enjoy the same things that you do, then things can work out pretty okay. But again, we're not talking about anything spectacular. So do just make the most of what you have, and try not to have huge expectations. Cancer. Cancer, the moon is, in some respects, doing very little. I mean, it's moving through Libra, it's kind of making a sextile to Mars, but that is just about it. Okay, it is moving into the Via Combusta, and maybe you should be aware of that. But what you want to do at the moment, Cancer, is really to do nothing. I think ideally, you don't want to be on anyone's radar. You just want to be yourself, not have anyone getting in your way, and you may feel that there are a couple of things that need to be done, especially early in the day, and you could just about get it together. And if you want to do anything useful, well, quite possibly you should be thinking about what you can do in the realm of money or sort of material goods. I mean, if there's something you need to sort out of a financial nature, and you need to be gently assertive, then I think that you can make an impact. I think people will listen to you. I think you'll get your way. But don't expect anything especially dramatic to be happening. And as far as the Via Combusta is concerned, the moon moving into Via Combusta is not an unusual event because it happens every month. But you should always know when the moon is moving into the Via Combusta. And sort of in the Americas, well, moon moves into the Via Combusta in the morning. It'll happen a bit later if you're in Europe or Asia. But over the course of a day, moon moving into the Via Combusta, and this is just a time, when things can happen. So don't assume that absolutely everything is going to go to plan, in the last half of the day and into tomorrow. Well, in fact, the moon is going to be in Via Combusta for a couple of days because it goes through late Libra, and then it goes into Scorpio. So that whole period when the moon is moving from 15 Libra to 15 Scorpio, it will be in the Via Combusta. And so, that can be a time when Cancerians have to accept the occasional surprise, and these surprises may relate to your home, what your family are up to. So do keep an eye on your family and your family's activities and your family's plans and their announcements. And don't make too many assumptions. But I just don't think for most Cancerians it's going to be especially dramatic. And I think that looking at the day overall, Cancer, I just don't think that a huge amount is going to be happening. And I think I'm saying a similar thing for all of the 12 signs. That there just doesn't seem to be much in the way of drama, and in fact, probably the busiest day, certainly in Americas, is going to be the beginning of the day, and after that, you may have free time, even if you are, I don't know, whatever, going into work or you've got some other obligations. I don't think you need to take these obligations too seriously, and perhaps the only obligation you have to perhaps be concerned about is your obligations to your home and your family. But even then, I don't think that they're going to be too pressing. So it may just be a Friday that you can just enjoy, because it's unlikely that anything especially spectacular is going to happen. Though always make an allowance with the moon in the Via Combusta for something happening which, you might not have expected it, but I think you'll be able to deal with it relatively easily without too much drama. Leo. Leo, we are living in uncertain times. Even though, today I'm not convinced that today is especially spectacular for anyone. And there's always going to be someone who has a spectacular day, but I think for most of us, it's going to be a relatively quiet Friday. Okay, that doesn't mean to say that there's going to be some dramatic news from whether it's India or Pakistan or Ukraine or whatever. There's always something dramatic going on every day. And there are higher level forces which have a collective impact, and we can look at events like full moons and new moons. Full moons and new moons, when they happen, they're rather like mines. I mean, mines as in explosive mines. It's like the universe lays a mine with a new moon and a full moon, and that mine can explode at any time. So I'm not saying that globally nothing is going to happen today. And there's still a lot of fear around. People are worried, and they're worried about the economy. They're worried about their own lives. They're worried about what's going to happen next, and that is the environment in which you live. And people may not know what to do. Now, where does that leave you? Well, I think that in many ways, Leo, you can be quite a stabilizing force. You're someone who can create a sense of perspective. And if you have any position of authority, then I think it's a time when you should try to leverage it. You can just come over as someone who really is authoritative and sensible and reassuring. And ideally you would put yourself in a position where you could almost be a bit of a benevolent dictator. Okay, maybe not a dictator, but ideally your approach should be followed, and you can give advice. And there's something about your advice that seems to be obvious, that it seems to be very clear, and you give the impression of being someone that is going to look after everyone's best interests. So really try to cultivate that. Even if you yourself are feeling unsure of yourself, you might be thinking, well, who are you to give advice? Who are you to be in any position of authority? Well, it's all about state of mind, and it's about how you present yourself. But if you are able to present yourself in an authoritative way, I think that people are going to respond to that. And additionally, Leo, you're going to find it pretty easy to say what's on your mind. So if there's something you want to communicate, something you want to say, you want to get people to listen to you, then I think they will. It will be relatively easy. I'm not saying it's going to be 100% easy. You might have to put in a little bit of effort. And that's something I'm saying to all of the 12 signs. This is not a day when just everything just runs totally smoothly all by itself. If you want results, you have to put in the effort. But if you make the effort to get noticed, and you've got something important to say, then people are going to listen. So perhaps, Leo, you should put in the effort, and in that way you can, not just feel useful, but you can also have a favourable impact on everyone. Virgo, just a reminder that Mercury is getting ready to change signs. Mercury is now at 28 Aries, maybe 29 Aries. So over the weekend, Mercury moves into Taurus. So for you, that is an important change, and perhaps you should start getting ready for that change. and it might be a bad day to be making decisions or making up your mind, because right now you haven't got all the information. There are still things you need to learn, still things you need to understand, and you don't know what things are going to be like. So you might make assumptions about the environment in which you are living and functioning, and you right now. And if you were to make a decision today, you'd be making that decision on the basis of current assumptions. But once Mercury moves into Taurus, you might want to change those assumptions. So that's something that you should be prepared for. And so don't feel pushed. You might feel that there is a hurry, maybe because it's Friday, people want to get things done, but no, it can wait. And the way you feel on Monday after the weekend may be very different from how you feel right now. And aside from that, we do have the moon moving through Libra, continuing to move through Libra, and Libra is the sign following Virgo. So while the moon is moving through Libra, there can be a general concern about material issues, money, what you have, what you don't have. It's a general concern, though. I don't think it's a specific concern, and the moon is making a sextile to Mars, so it's possible that you can do something in quite a low-key way, which does help you, financially. It can sort something out, or maybe you can resolve a financial matter that requires you to be clear about something. And if you can be clear, or maybe it's a form that needs to be filled in, or something needs to be sent, or of course, if it's really important, then maybe you shouldn't do anything that's really important. If it's something routine, fine. But if you're doing something really important, then I would leave it until next week, probably. And later in the day, you might hear something or realize something financially, which is a little bit of a surprise. You hadn't really thought about that, and your first instinct might be to be concerned. But I think if you think about it again, you'll realize that it's not a particularly big deal. Libra, it's a day when you can be yourself, and you can be gently assertive. The moon in Libra is making a sextile to Mars, and I think that sextile, that moon Mars sextile is certainly a fortunate influence, and it allows you to be assertive and also to get noticed, but assertive not in a very big way. I mean, it's a sextile. It's not a square. It's not an opposition, and you try hard to get noticed, and you do get noticed, and people do listen to you. And if you're trying to get through to someone, or trying to get someone to realize something, then through your efforts you can finally make the connection. But I don't think it's going to be especially easy. I mean, I think it's possible. You put in the effort, you get the result, but it's not going to be dead easy, and you possibly have to get the right approach. I think at the moment you may find that your first attempts to make contact with people, to make an impression, don't actually work out. And that's probably because your approach is wrong. If you're just too light and you're a bit complacent, then you're not going to make an impact. On the other hand, if you take people seriously and you make a special effort to take people seriously, and you can perhaps tune into what's bothering people, what their real concerns are, then I think they will start to listen to you. So probably Libra, in a social sense, the more serious you are, the better it's going to be, and the easier it is to make an impression. And that's also about understanding what other people take seriously. And if you can understand what other people take seriously and what the nature of their fears and their doubts are, well, then in the end they are going to listen to you. But keep going. You're not necessarily going to get noticed with the first attempt. It may take the second and third attempt, but in the end, I think you will start to have an impact. But again, not an especially dramatic impact, because it's not really that kind of day. Scorpio, it is a day when potentially not a great deal is going to be happening. I'm really selling this to everyone, because astrologically it's pretty empty, certainly in terms of exact aspects. And maybe I'm too focused on exact aspects. You could say, oh well, Mars is opposition Pluto. Okay, it might be 6 degrees out, but Mars is your ruler. It's still opposition Pluto. And you're still concerned about issues of power and control. Who's controlling who? Are you in control? Do you have enough control? But it's pretty mild, that Mars Pluto opposition. You might more usefully want to focus on the Venus square Mars heliocentrically. Again, that Venus square Mars is separating, but it's within a couple of degrees, and so I can repeat what I said about that Venus square Mars and say, with that Venus square Mars, the way you conduct yourself and present yourself, is going to be important. Certain people have particular standards. They might be irrational standards, but they have standards nonetheless. And certain behaviors they can't stand and will put them off. Other behaviors, they love. And in terms of your presentation and style, you have to just make sure that you understand other people's sensibilities. It's easy to be off-putting. So if you want to get people to like and appreciate you, you have to get the style and approach right, even though you might regard things like style and approach as being totally unnecessary, as well as trivialities, not exactly the most important concern, but they may be important with that Venus square Mars heliocentrically. Now, as far as the specifics of today is concerned, well, the moon does make a sextile to Mars. Mars is, of course, your ruler. I think that moon sextile Mars can be useful, especially if you're in Australia and New Zealand, where it is exact around lunchtime, later, around midday, lunchtime. If you are in the Americas, that moon sextile Mars is pretty weak. It's separating, but we've still got Moon in Libra, got Mars in Leo. It has some effect. And so, Scorpio, if you want to have an impact, it just may be that you have to firstly really put in the work, because that moon sextile Mars is so weak. It's going to need a lot of work to actually manifest. And secondly, you shouldn't be looking for immediate results, and you shouldn't be looking to do anything spectacular. I mean, you might try to do something spectacular, but I just don't think it's going to work. And it just may be that you just you do things your own way. You're patient, and you don't get upset if you don't get any immediate results. But if you're working away in a manner that you are comfortable with, then in the end you're going to start to make waves, but it just could take time. And also, Scorpio, you have to remember that the moon is in the last half of Libra. It's getting ready to move into your sign, and over the weekend the moon does move into Scorpio. And I think that with the moon in Scorpio, when the moon does move into Scorpio, you're going to probably be feeling a lot more definite, and better able to assert yourself. So if you're thinking about the weekend, then the weekend may be a time when you need to be pulling out all the stops. So perhaps you shouldn't be planning on having a quiet weekend. And additionally, we have Mercury moving into Taurus, your opposite sign. And Mercury moving into Taurus might say something about relationships, a change there. But I'll consider that when I do my forecast for the weekend. Sagittarius, you are in a position where you feel you have quite a lot to say. You've got opinions on a lot of different subjects, and you would like to get them out into the open, and you want to get noticed, and that's great. But you can't expect massive things to happen. I'm telling this to everyone, by the way. It's not just you. I think that for most of us, regardless of what happens in Ukraine or India, or Gaza, for most of us, it's going to be a relatively quiet day. And it's always good to have a quiet day. But you need to just realize that, you've got lots to say, and people might listen, but they might not listen. And perhaps what's really important is that you're able to talk to yourself. You're able to tell yourself what you want. And sometimes self-communication is really a good thing. If you're informing yourself about what you want and what is possible, that allows you to be more definite, and that allows you to start planning. Now, from a social perspective today, the moon is making a sextile to Mars, and this moon sextile Mars does give you a certain ability to get on with people. It's not going to be difficult to get on with people. They'll respond relatively well to you. They'll smile. They're not going to put up barriers. But the question is it actually going anywhere? In the short term, it might not be. And so, don't have too many expectations about other people. Even if they're close friends, they might say they're going to do things, but they might not, or they might not get round to it, or something might turn up. And don't count on your friends and other associates and other people you might meet, and don't take their promises and assurances at face value. And if anyone breaks a promise, don't take it personally. Sometimes promises just get broken, and it's no one's fault, and there was a misunderstanding, and that's just the way it is. And turning to relationships, when you're looking at relationships from a Sagittarian perspective, it's often a good idea to look at the planet Mercury, because Mercury is ruler of Gemini. Of course, Gemini is your opposite sign. And Mercury is about to move out of Aries and into Taurus. And so this might mean that someone is on the verge of making a change. Might be someone very important to you. They're moving from one state into another state. They're moving from Aries into Taurus. So someone who perhaps is showing real Aries characteristics is might be could be assertive, impulsive. They seem to be also full of energy, very fiery. There might be a sudden change. Someone might just suddenly slow down over the next couple of days and into the weekend. So, don't assume that another person is full of energy. Okay, they might be full of energy right now, but a couple of days' time, that energy might have gone, and it may be that their priorities will change. So, that's another thing if we're talking about promises. And so, someone makes a promise on the basis of how they feel right now, Mercury in Aries. But when it comes to actually delivering a promise, Mercury's in Taurus. So the situation is changing, and it may be changing for the better. Mercury in Taurus, you could say, is more reliable than Mercury in Aries. And so it could be that someone close to you is in the process of calming down. But we'll have to see how that goes, and I'll be talking more about Mercury and Taurus, definitely in my video for the weekend. Capricorn, you really would like things to move, and you can see the possibilities, and you can see how things could work out. But the question is, will they work out? Will things move quite in the way you expect? And there is a possibility that it just doesn't quite happen, that maybe you don't have the support you need. So if you are expecting to do things on the basis of getting support from other people, then it might not happen. So if you want to make progress, Capricorn, you may have to be quite self-reliant and really strive to create action and not be fooled by other people. People can be very deceptive at the moment, and it's not necessarily your problem. It's just the way things are right now, and there is just a feeling that people are in a constant state of flux. And so if you are reliant on people, and that state of flux could, really get you down. But why would it get you down? Well, it would get you down if you're too reliant on another person, or not just another person. In fact, it's a whole group of people may not be able to deliver. And this may not just be about people in your immediate environment, but just society. They just don't deliver, and no one really knows what they want. And as a Capricorn, you want things to be definite. So with what you're doing, you just need to make sure that the one person that you can trust, and the one person you do trust, is you yourself. And if you can do things in a way where the only person that can let you down is you, then things are great. Okay, they may not be great, but you've got nothing much to complain about. And so ask yourself, Capricorn, what is it that you're trying to do today? And just do it yourself. Use your reserves, your emotional reserves, to see you through. And then the day can be quietly satisfying. But don't expect drama. I mean, you shouldn't get drama if you're doing things absolutely on your own. There won't be any drama. Any drama would come from other people you might be reliant on. The drama of someone letting you down. But if you don't put yourself in a position where you can be let down, then things should be okay. Aquarius, moon is still in Libra, and it's not doing very much in Libra. But from your view, it's just great that the moon is in Libra. I mean, Libra is an air sign. It's a sign that you feel comfortable with. The moon in Libra will actually make a trine to Jupiter tomorrow, but that trine at the moment is a little bit distant, so I don't think that trine is going to really manifest right now. But I think that in general, Aquarius, you're going to feel quietly comfortable. Not a great deal is going to be happening, and it just may be a time when you can do some gentle exploration, and things will happen sort of quite quickly, and I mean not super quickly, but you can discover things, and you can realize that things have a new dimension, and you might actually make a discovery which catches you by surprise. You might be thinking about your ideas and what you believe in, and you ask questions, and then you get a response that you hadn't expected, and as a result of that response, you might change your mind about something. So do be open to that possibility that your mind could be changed, and in that way, you can set yourself up perhaps for that moon trine Jupiter. But again, that moon trine Jupiter, that's more about the early weekend rather than today. Though by the end of the day, you may feel that things really are starting to move, and you may feel a sense of optimism, a belief that things are getting better, and that you're approaching some kind of solution. And if you're doing anything of a creative nature at the end of the day, not really the beginning of the day, but at the end of the day, then you may feel that things are really coming together. So perhaps Aquarius, you should stay up late. Don't just do nothing over the evening. Try to do something constructive. Don't feel you have to involve other people in what you're doing. I don't think other people are going to be especially helpful today. In fact, other people could just make a slightly complicated situation even more complicated. So you don't need help. You don't need support. Okay, some people you really can trust, but I think that most people can, I think, today be safely ignored. Pisces. At the moment, Pisces, you do feel that there is something you need to communicate. You have a particular view and a particular angle, and it's something that you want people to hear about. And the question is, how do you express that view? And you might try to just say what's on your mind, but is anyone going to be listening? They might be distracted, or they might not take you seriously enough. So you do have to think about timing, and if there's a message to deliver, now might not quite be the time to be doing it, but you perhaps need to just wait for things to change. And also you may find that when it actually comes to opening your mouth and saying the words, things straight away become more complicated, and more difficult. And you can just feel what other people are feeling, and you just feel that maybe they're not quite as receptive to your message as you thought they were. And this just could mean that you need to have a greater sort of emotional awareness of what's going on through people's minds. And it might occur to you that certain people are distracted. When someone is distracted, it's very difficult to get them to listen. They are cognitively completely engaged on something else. They can't process any more information. And so maybe you need to just accept that. And one thing that's happening over the next day or two is that Mercury is changing sign. Mercury is moving out of Aries and it's moving into Taurus. Now, I think that this sign change from your perspective is probably quite a good thing. Mercury, is the planet of communication. It's also a planet relating to other people. So if Mercury is moving into Taurus, that might mean that certain people are more interested in what you have to say. So if you have got something you feel you need to say today, then maybe you should wait. Just wait a couple of days. You wait till the weekend, or perhaps into early next week. When the situation will be easier. And really, at the moment, Pisces, do you need anyone else? If you really think about it, I don't actually think you do. I think that you're quite capable of, doing things on your own. I think that you seem to know what needs to be done, and if you just go about your daily business in a sort of calm, unflappable way, then things will fit together. And then when you move into the weekend, you'll be properly prepared, and as the situation improves, you will be ready for this improvement. And that's it. I haven't got much to say for today for any of the 12 signs, because I just don't think the astrology supports it. From an aspect perspective, there's just not much going on. You could say the only thing happening today is that sextile between the Moon and Mars. So I now want to look at today from a different perspective, from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 4, youthful folly. Now, this hexagram is a warning. It's a warning about consulting the I Ching. It is perhaps indicating that you should not be consulting the I Ching. That, whatever question you are coming into this section with, you already know the answer. You've been told. So arguably you should just stop watching me. The I Ching has said its bit, and it doesn't want to be disturbed anymore. And so really, I shouldn't really be recording anything here. But I'm going to proceed. The I Ching does provide a framework for interpreting the youthful folly, like every other hexagram. And generally speaking, one is dealing with someone who is a fool. Now, that person could be you. That really is possible. It may be that you're involved in something that you don't know what you're doing, and because you don't know what you're doing, you should stop, or you should just be aware of how foolhardy you are. Or it could be someone else doesn't know what they're doing. How do you deal with stupid people? What approach do you take? Do you tolerate them? Do you give them another chance? Do you punish them? And punishment is actually part of this hexagram, because if someone is being a fool, they need to be punished. Obviously not punished too much, but they at the very least need to see the errors of their way. Now, this hexagram does actually have a lot of moving lines. We have third line moving, fourth line moving, fifth line moving, sixth line moving. Now, that indicates something about today. It does suggest that actually today is going to be more active than the astrology suggests. So if you looked at the 12 signs, I was, pretty non-committal. I wasn't, it might not happen, might happen, got to put in some effort, don't take things for granted, that kind of approach. But the I Ching is perhaps giving a different picture. Things could happen, and we may be seeing the path of folly, folly in its different forms. Maybe you make a stupid mistake. Someone else makes a stupid mistake. Everyone makes a stupid mistake. And, where does that lead? And third line moving may say something about how we regard other people. Maybe the third line moving is about someone we're thinking about having contact with. We think this person might be helpful, or could be about a relationship. And the advice here is that if we're in that kind of situation, we should think again, because some people are not right for us. Maybe it would be an act of folly to spend too much time with the wrong person. The approach of the two people may just be different. It's not necessarily that they're a bad person, but just the chemistry may not work, or you come from different backgrounds or different approaches that just can't work, you can't fit together. And then the fourth line moves, and it's all too much. We try to get things together. We try very hard to get things together. But can we do it? It just may seem to be too much, or it's possible that we have thoughts about what is possible, but those thoughts are unrealistic, and that is about this theme of youthful folly. And then the fifth line moves. Now, fifth line in I Ching is often fortunate, and this fifth line could be about someone who is, in a way, a fool, but someone who knows they're a fool, or who knows that they're inexperienced. They don't know what they're doing. Again, it could be you, could be someone else. And because they don't know what they're doing, because they know they don't know what they're doing, they're prepared to get help. They're prepared to get advice. So if you're feeling that you are completely at sea, then don't be afraid to get advice. That's the right thing to do. Or maybe you're dealing with someone who you regard as being a bit of an idiot, and don't write them off. If they know that then they're not getting it together, then maybe they're prepared to come to you, get some help from you, and that might be useful. Then the sixth line moves, and the sixth line, the fifth line was good, but then the sixth line goes, and that's someone who really is beyond help, someone who really is a complete fool and refuses to listen. They might have pretended to listen, they might have tried to listen, but they won't listen. And under those circumstances, what do you do? What do you do with someone who is as I think the one version of I Ching, I think it was the Wilhelm version of I Ching, is incorrigible. What do you do? And the I Ching talks about punishment, but not too much punishment. You can't be too harsh with someone who is very foolish. It won't have any impact. So you have to get the balance right. But sometimes some people, they can't be helped, and maybe that is the message. So there is a lot of stupidity around today, and hopefully it's not your stupidity and it's someone else's stupidity, but it could be a bit of both. And the best you can do is to try to concentrate on that fifth line. if it is you who is the fool, then you can be the fool who understands you're a fool and therefore is prepared to get advice. Then you're not beyond help. And so perhaps you have a bit of choice there. Now, with all these moving lines, obviously we move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 28, which is preponderance of the great. And it just may be a situation that we end up, but it's just all too much. And it's a very heavy load. And you look, you've got those 4 unbroken lines in the middle of a hexagram. And the capacity to lift this load is really not much, because you've got the top and the bottom lines of the handles, and how are you going to lift it? Well, you can lift it, and it's just a difficult situation, and you've taken the burden. You have to take the burden. I mean, obviously, don't literally take the burden. I don't want you to do your back and injure your back or anything like that. It's more of a metaphorical burden, but it's going to be tough, and you may have to do things on your own, because if we looked at the previous hexagram, a lot of people can't be trusted. They are fools. They may claim they know what they're doing, but they don't know what they're doing. And are you the fool? Well, you could be the fool, but if you understand the error and folly of your ways, then yes, there can be change. But still, in the end, it's all down to you. And perhaps, you're reminded by looking at other people's behavior, but that the only person you can trust is you, and you've got to take the burden. And the I Ching does suggest with this hexagram 28 that if you do take the burden and you just keep moving, then in the end you can make progress, and you can carry this burden to wherever it needs to be carried. And now let's look at the astrology of May the 9th. So the May the 9th, I wanted to look at the horoscopes of David Berrigan and Sophie Scholl, and in particular we're looking at what links them, what are the common features, what explains how they in a way had sort of similar experiences and attracted similar challenges. Or of course in Sophie Scholl's case, it led to her execution in her early 20s. And then there is this artist Manuel Gregorio Acosta. I wanted to look at his chart as well. What links these 3 people who were all born on May the 9th, 1921. But first of all, I wanted to look at the Treaty of Windsor. And so the Treaty of Windsor is famous because it's a treaty between England and Portugal, and it is apparently the oldest still functional treaty in the world. So England and Portugal have never been at war, and so they've had this alliance lasting since the 14th century. And the treaty was signed on May the 9th. May the 9th, 1386. Now this says May the 17th. Now that's because this program seems to have this desire for it to be switched to a different calendar. But I checked on astro.com, because astro.com has ephemerides for sort of every year. So I checked the ephemeris for 1386 to make sure that I'd got the positions right for May the 9th. So these are the positions. I've gone for positions of the planets at noon, May the 9th, set for Windsor in England when the treaty was signed. I think the treaty actually came into being a bit later. It was all related to a marriage and regarding John of Gaunt, and I never really studied medieval history at school, but I know John of Gaunt had something to do with it. And so this is a chart of a treaty that is still in existence. What's that? Sort of 650 years later. And so, what gives that treaty between England and Portugal such permanence? And we were talking about the swearing in of the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and I saw that there were certain negative things about that chart. But one thing that I did say that was positive about the swearing in of Friedrich Merz is it happened at the time of a trine between the Sun and the Moon. The Sun and the Moon is quite fortunate. It's about harmony, and if you want to have a treaty, having a trine between the Moon and the Sun is something that is definitely worth having. And with Friedrich Merz, the Moon was in Virgo, was his swearing in, Moon in Virgo, trine the Sun in Taurus. This chart, the Treaty of Windsor, the Moon in Virgo is trine the Sun in Taurus. Now, by the way, the Sun is not on Algol. It looks as if it's on Algol, but you mustn't forget that this is 650 years ago, and you have to take into account the precession of the equinox. So I just thought I'd sort of point that out. So Moon trine Sun is a good time to have a treaty, and there's something incredibly solid about this chart. It's got Mercury, Venus, Sun in Taurus, Neptune and Pluto also in Taurus, and then it's got the Moon in Virgo, Mars in Capricorn. There's a solidity to it. Mercury trine Mars, Moon trine the Sun, and there aren't any positive planets here. There's Uranus in Libra, but there's no traditional planets in positive signs. So there's nothing, dramatic to mess things up. And you've got Jupiter and Saturn and the North Node in Cancer. So I think this is a really grounded chart, and I think that chart actually works quite well if we think about that as the beginning of the oldest treaty in the world. And yeah, I believe England and Portugal have never been at war. And then I wanted to look at May the 9th, 1921 birthdays. And 3 people were born on May the 9th, 2021. I mean, 3 people who were relatively famous. And so one of these people is an artist. And I'm afraid I don't know very much about him. He was sort of born in Mexico, in Chihuahua, and he emigrated to the US. I think he served in the US Army during the war, and he became an artist, and he became quite a famous artist. And he was famous for painting the Union leader Cesar Chavez, who was very active in the 1960s, and Manuel Acosta I think in 1989 he died. He was killed by just a drunk battered him with a lead pipe. I don't think there was anything political about his death. It just happened, and this was in Texas, and so there is something about his art that is perhaps very grounded. I mean, I don't know much about his art, but on the thumbnail I've got a picture of Cesar Chavez. It seems to be there's something quite sort of simplistic about that art. This is the way he looks. And, there's no thrills to it. I mean, that's at least my response to that picture. It is very down to earth, and so you could say that here is someone who has a Sun-Mercury conjunction in a Sun-Mercury conjunction in Taurus, and so there is something artistic about Taurus. Taurus. With art, you're thinking about the paints. There is something very grounded about it. When you think about those tubes of paint and palettes, it's all very earthy. I mean, for me, it's all sort of too earthy, that process. I've never got involved in painting, and tubes of paint don't fill me with great enthusiasm. And the environment where artists work. When I was at school, going into sort of art studios and going into other art studios, something about it I just didn't like. That's just me. It's too earthy for me. But I think that painting, there is something very, very grounded about it. Of course, this is not computer art. This is, you do real art with tubes of paint, and he additionally has Moon and Mars in Gemini, so you could say in his case he had quite a varied career, and he moved from place to place. He moved from Mexico to the United States. I think he spent time in Los Angeles, and then he finally moved I think to El Paso. So you might say that there's variety there, but the trouble with Manuel Acosta is I don't have a time of birth for him. Now I do have a time of birth for Daniel Berrigan and for Sophie Scholl, and so here is Daniel Berrigan's chart, and he was born on May the 9th, 1921 at 6:30 p.m. So he has Scorpio rising, and so it's just easier to look at that chart and ask yourself, what is it in this chart, Daniel Berrigan's chart, that makes him into a peace campaigner? And is there anything there? I mean, it really strikes you as, well, you can see people who have Scorpio rising can be very passionate, and they can have a strong sense of justice and injustice. So, that could just be a Scorpio rising feel. It's something about that. And, additionally, Daniel Berrigan, he's a Taurus, and Taurians can actually be quite fanatical. Once they decide they believe something, once they've decided on something, they will just go for it. They don't just change their mind. Now, okay, he has a sun and Mercury in Taurus. Okay, he did also have the Moon and Mars in Gemini, but in spite of that Gemini, that Sun Mercury conjunction, it's a very close Sun Mercury conjunction. So once he'd made up his mind, that war was a bad thing. War was something horrific, something that he had to fight against, even if there was a risk of him going to prison. And he was arrested, I think, on numerous occasions, and I think sent to prison. At one stage he was even on the run from the FBI. So here is a man who is a Catholic priest. He's a Jesuit, but he is not afraid of standing up for what he believes in. I mean, I think that is part of the Jesuit experience. The Jesuits, they can be quite political. There's something about standing up for what you believe in. I mean, don't ask me, I'm not a Catholic, I'm not a great expert on it, but there was a logic to it, and the Jesuits certainly teach their students, their priests, to have logic. It's quite a sort of an intellectual type of Catholicism, and so he saw it through to the end, and even in old age he was getting arrested. I think he was protesting against the excesses of Wall Street, and of course he was an activist for HIV, and he was breaking into military military bases and attacking missiles and using homemade napalm, or helping use homemade napalm in the 60s for burning draft papers. So he did what he had to do, and that might be about Taurus. And he's got Scorpio rising, and I mean, I'm not really into mixing signs and houses, but you might notice that he's got that Moon Mars conjunction in Gemini in the 8th, and so with the 8th, I mean, the 8th house is not Scorpio. They're different, but still there is an intensity to having that Moon Mars conjunction in the 8th house. And notice how that moon is square Saturn. So moon square Saturn, that just can be about a sense of obligation, and there's a certain austerity to him. I mean, if you are a priest, you could say there is an austerity, but even in old age, he was protesting right to the very end, and that must have represented a certain amount of sort of physical hardship. You can see in the picture on the thumbnail, he's all sort of dressed up to deal with the cold. I don't know quite what the temperature was like when he was making the speech, whatever he was saying in that thumbnail. But the moon is square Saturn, and additionally, he had a very close Jupiter-Uranus opposition. So that Jupiter-Uranus opposition, obviously took place in 1921, and so a lot of people born in 1921 had that Jupiter-Uranus opposition, and they didn't become rebels. But for him, he did become a rebel. And so Jupiter-Uranus is about freedom, wanting freedom, and freedom from something. And if you don't like something, you have to make an impression. And maybe what makes that Jupiter-Uranus opposition important is the fact that it is linked with Venus. So you can see that Venus is he has Venus, a very close semi-square between Venus and Uranus, and therefore Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter, and so we can see that on his 90-degree dial. So there's Uranus at 9 degrees Pisces, Venus at 24 Aries, so they're 45 degrees apart, and then Venus is also sesquiquadrate Jupiter. So let's look at that on a 90-degree dial just to make the point. So there's his Jupiter-Uranus opposition on a 90-degree dial. It's shown as a conjunction. And so there's Venus making the sesquiquadrate to Uranus, sesquiquadrate to Jupiter, because sesquiquadrates on a 90-degree dial are shown as opposition. So Venus is a strange planet. I mean, I have said quite recently that you could associate Venus with war. It is a planet of war. But contradictory as it might sound, it could also be the planet of peace and harmony. And, peace could be, very important to him. So Venus lined up with his Jupiter-Uranus opposition. This is what he feels he has to protest about. And Venus is, of course, in Aries. So I think you can see that. Incidentally, he also has the Sun trine Saturn, a very close Sun trine Saturn. So Sun trine Saturn is... it's about discipline and it's austerity, and so that's Daniel Berrigan's horoscope. Now there are a couple of midpoints which need to be looked at, and one midpoint of particular importance. Well, particularly it's his Mars tree. So. Again, we associate Mars with the planet of war. We associate Mars with war. Mars is a planet of war. Yet, he has Mars. This is his Mars tree. He's got Mars aspecting the Sun-Moon midpoint. He's got Mars on the Sun-Saturn midpoint, Mars on the Sun-Moon midpoint. So, one way of interpreting Mars on the Sun-Moon midpoint is someone who is a soldier, who is a fighter. Someone who might like to go to Vietnam or the Second World War to fight. That's one way of looking at Mars. But Mars is also about fighting for what you believe in. And it doesn't compromise. So for him, having Mars on the Sun-Moon midpoint, Mars on the Sun-Saturn midpoint, that's about him really being an activist. And that's an absolutely reasonable interpretation for Mars on the Sun Moon midpoint. It's also got Hades opposition the ascendant midheaven midpoint. I don't know what that is about. Hades might be, with Hades on the ascendant midheaven midpoint. Remember, Hades is the planet of things that are unpleasant and dirt and garbage and evil, and it could be that for him, with Hades on the ascendant midheaven midpoint, that's about him just seeing everything that is wrong with the society in which he's living, being very aware of it, and feeling he has to respond. Maybe he feels he has to respond in a way that is sometimes criminal. I mean, you could associate Hades with criminality. I mean, I don't know quite if that's the right interpretation of it. So that's his chart. Of course, we're looking at it after the event, after we know what he did. Would we have been able to predict that beforehand? Well, I think the Jupiter-Uranus opposition suggests that the image of freedom is really important to him. Freedom matters. And freedom, in his case, from maybe oppression, from a threat of war, and that's something he's going to fight against. And then you have the horoscope of Sophie Scholl. Now, I've looked at Sophie Scholl's horoscope before. I've looked at it several times before. But in the case of Sophie Scholl, I want to consider the ways in which her horoscope is similar to Daniel Berrigan's chart, because they were born on the same day. And even though there's a gender difference, and I think the gender difference would potentially be important, because you'd expect in a male chart the male planets to be owned and the female planets to be projected, and likewise with Sophie Scholl, for example, her Mars, you'd expect that to be projected to some extent, or even her Sun in Taurus. But in spite of the gender difference, there are great similarities between the two. So, like with Daniel Berrigan, there were things that Sophie Scholl couldn't stand, and there is the concept of freedom and protest, and she protested in whatever ways she could, and putting up a poster at Munich University, and that poster condemning the war and condemning the Nazis and so forth led to her arrest and her execution. And of course, it happened to her brother as well. So, like Daniel Berrigan, Sophie Scholl had a Jupiter-Uranus opposition, and also like Daniel Berrigan, Venus was making a semi-square to Uranus and a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. So the way that Venus works, and for her, of course, you could say that Venus is more personal. Venus in Aries, it's her Venus. It's not going to be projected, and so maybe it works in a slightly different way. But I somehow think that if Daniel Berrigan had been thrown into Germany during the Second World War, he probably would have behaved in exactly the same way and would have met a very similar fate. And because there was something very uncompromising about both of them, totally uncompromising, and that could relate to Taurus. Now, you would expect the uncompromisingness of Taurus to be stronger with Daniel Berrigan compared to Sophie Scholl, simply because the Sun is a male planet, but both of them own their suns. And as far as the Jupiter-Uranus opposition is concerned, it is made personal by the Venus semi-square, by the Venus sesquiquadrate. And so, it's a generational opposition, Jupiter opposition Uranus. A lot of people have it, and most of the people who have it, they don't rebel, they just fit in, and they don't take risks. But for these two, Venus is linked up with it, and that does make it personal. And as far as the midpoints are concerned, you can see that Sophie Scholl's sun is at Taurus, sun is in Taurus, and moon is in Gemini. So she has Mars on the sun-moon midpoint. So does Daniel Berrigan. So obviously, going back to Daniel Berrigan's chart, there's his sun, there's his moon. Mars is right on the sun-moon midpoint. So they both have that, and so they both have attitude. And of course, she has Venus in Aries. They both have Venus in Aries as well. So they have real attitude. And so when you look at a chart, always see what's on the sun-moon midpoint, whether it's a conjunction, an opposition, a square, semi-square, sextile, quadrate, because it may say so much about the person that sun-moon midpoint. And so that Mars is aggressive, it's assertive, it wants to do stuff. And in this case, it's a person who is an activist, and both of them were activists, and both of them were not afraid of the law. They weren't afraid. Well, the law at the time, you could say that the Nazi law was illegal in its own way. It was what is the law of the land? But she wasn't afraid of the law, and she wasn't afraid of risking her own life. And in the same way, Daniel Berrigan, well, he didn't have the opportunity to risk his own life because he was in the US in the 1960s and beyond. And so, whatever you think of the United States, they weren't executing activists. Okay, they might have shot activists. You had Kent State and whatever, but they weren't specifically taking activists, putting them in court and sentencing them to death. So it was a different environment, but he was prepared to take risks. In fact, both of them were prepared to take risks. And I think you can see that in their horoscopes. So as far as the similarities between the two are concerned, I think that the Mars on the sun-moon midpoint really says a lot about them. And the fact that they both had Jupiter-Uranus oppositions, with Venus making the semi-square and the sextile quadrate to them, I think is the link. So here, I think, is a good example of, with Sophie Scholl and Daniel Berrigan, of astrology working, of them both being born on the same day and both having similar experiences, kind of, but you do have to take into account that they were born in different environments. The United States was not Nazi Germany. They had different ways of working, and the risks of activism were, of course, much higher in Nazi Germany in the 1940s than in America in the 1960s and beyond. So those are a few thoughts about the May the 9th charts. I hope you found that of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.